Now, we're in a perpetual state of crisis. The Reserve Bank warns of slow economic growth this year and the next. The central bank is warning of continuing risk to inflation as it increases the repo rate by 25 basis points. The repurchase rate is now 7.25% and the prime lending rate is at 10.75%. What does this mean to the already cash-strapped consumer? Well, let's speak to efficient group economist Dawie Roodt to get some advice for your pocket. Mr. Roodt, good morning and thank you very much for your time. You know, as a start, many economists had predicted a 50 basis point increase. We most certainly will still feel the pinch of this 25, but were you among those that expected a higher increase?
Indeed so. Good morning to you. I expected the Reserve Bank to increase interest rates by 50 basis points. They went to 25 basis points only. And reading through the statement of the Reserve Bank, I understand why. They now expect that this load shedding will shave off as much as 2% of economic growth, and that in itself is disinflationary. So the fact that the economy is growing slower will actually put downward pressure on inflation in South Africa, and for that reason I believe 25 basis points was the right decision. But I initially thought 50 basis points, and I must tell you, I'm absolutely horrified to see that the Reserve Bank expects load shedding to reduce economic growth by as much as 2% this year, and obviously for the years coming as well. They've got excellent models, probably the best economic models in the country, and if they say the economic growth will be about 2% less than previously expected, then I think we can believe that, and we should all be very, very concerned.
It's honestly very concerning, probably the most concerning that came out of yesterday's address. I mean, expected growth is around 0.3%. So would you say we can attribute this solely to load shedding?
Of course not solely to load shedding. Of course, there are external factors. We saw what happened to commodity prices and the oil price recently. The Americans increasing interest rates contribute to a weaker South African currency, and those sort of factors. But 2%, the Reserve Bank did indicate that 2% it can be attributed to load shedding itself only. And in fact, more than 2%. If you put that into monetary terms, we're talking about, if you look at the last couple of years and future weaker economic growth, we're talking about hundreds of billions of rands of lost production. And to put it into perspective, if the Reserve Bank expects the economy to basically not grow, 0.3% growth, that's what they're expecting at the moment, while the population is growing at 1.5% in South Africa, it's easy to understand that on a per capita basis, the Reserve Bank is predicting that we are going to get poorer this year, and quite a lot. And that unemployment levels remain high and poverty levels will remain high and all of that. So this is of course not only attributed to load shedding, but load shedding itself is probably shaving off at least 2% from economic growth.
No, it's honestly a very scary reality. Now, many people were encouraged to purchase houses around COVID. I'm sure you remember that time. But here they are. They've got bonds. They're continuously increasing. When exactly do we expect this hiking cycle to draw to a close?
Yeah. I've got a suspicion we're very, very close to the end of this current hiking cycle. The Reserve Bank expects inflation to fall within the targeted band by the end of this year. I agree with them on that. It's probably going to take us another 2 years or so before we get to the middle of the band, to 4.5%. But I think the worst in terms of inflation is behind us. There is a possibility of another, say, 25 basis points increase by the Reserve Bank, but not necessarily. And then, so I think we are pretty close to the upper turning point as far as interest rates are concerned. So the worst is certainly behind us as far as inflation is concerned, and therefore also because monetary policy tightening or high interest rates.
Then what do we do as consumers? If you had to give us advice on how to stretch our money, what do we do honestly in this case?
I talk to people about their finances all the time, and the first thing I ask them is, do you know what's going on in your finances? And I can't believe, I'm always surprised to find out that people do not know what's going on in their finances. So the first thing that you need to do, even before you start with the budget, find out what is going on in your finances. So get all the numbers, get all your savings, get all your outstanding accounts, get all the information and know what is going on in your finances. So once you have that, then of course you have to have a family plan, you have to have a financial plan, you have to have a retirement plan, you have to have a budget and that sort of stuff. But the first step that you need to take is just find out what is going on with your finances so that you know what you have to decide about.
So essentially what that means is take out a bank statement, you print it out, you start going through your expenses and you find out how much is coming in exactly and how much is going out, because some people take it for granted, but people are just swiping the whole day, not realizing how much they're actually taking out of their bank.
And what you need to do is get the rest of the family to know what is going on as well. Get a family plan. Are we going to go on holiday? What will it mean if we want to go on holiday at the end of the year? How much do we have to save to go on holiday for the end of the year? What other plans do we have as a family? So get the family involved in all of this, and then draw up a budget and always include an expense item called unforeseen expenses, because there's always unforeseen expenses, and a save for that year-end holiday, so that when you come back the next year after the holiday, then you know you've spent money that you've saved already, and you're not in trouble, because a lot of people are in trouble in January month when those statements are coming in from the credit cards.
And then broadly speaking, interest rate increases haven't been as huge in some other emerging markets. Then one wonders then if this move won't lead to further criticism from those who are still calling for the Reserve Bank's mandate to include economic growth and job creation. What do you make of just that argument that with other emerging economies, it hasn't been as significant as us?
Well, the governor of the Reserve Bank made it very clear why it's important that we maintain the current mandate of the South African Reserve Bank. And let me also add to that, in that interest rates is not the best instrument to get inflation lower. Interest rates is a very blunt instrument. It's a hurt in the economy. That's not the right instrument to use. But the reason why we use interest rates is because that is all that we have available. There are many other things that we can do to get inflation lower. A good example is just to get Eskom to work properly, or the local authorities to work properly, or to create a more competitive environment. Those sort of things we actually should have done already, and that in itself would have pushed the inflation much, much lower. But because those things are politically very difficult to do, the only option left is the Reserve Bank. So I fully support the Reserve Bank, and we all should certainly fully support the South African Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank also, fortunately for us, started relatively early in the cycle to increase interest rates, and that's part of the reason why our inflation is stopping out at the moment, and why it's probably reached the up and turning point already. So I think we should thank the South African Reserve Bank for acting very quickly in the cycle by tightening monetary policy. But again, we have to understand that the Reserve Bank is the only option left now, because the other options, like, for example, fixing Eskom or whatever, those things are politically much more difficult to do. So let's support the Reserve Bank and actually point the fingers where we should be pointing the fingers, and that is that we do not have a proper competitive economic environment. That would have been much more helpful in getting inflation low.